Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. This is the second part in kind of a series we've been doing about the 1932 murder of Lilly Lindestrom, which comes to us from Stockholm, Sweden. If you didn't get a chance to hear part one of that, just a little bit of background info is that on May 4th, 1932, a prostitute, sex worker, whatever name you'd like to go by for that, named Lilly Lindestrom, was found in her small apartment. She was murdered, and the cause of death was attributed to blunt force trauma. She was found with a condom hanging out of her body. And the reason why this is called the Atlas vampire case or the vampire murder is because they found a blood-stained gravy ladle nearby. Now, a lot of theories have been raging about what could have possibly happened, and, I did part one, and I had my own suspicion, but I didn't say it because, it was nothing more than a hunch, a gut feeling, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this case, because I was like, there are some people who are invested in deep dive research, but what I could do with this one, which I'm relatively new to, was offer a first impression, a first glance at this, and what you sort of see, because I do think that's a little bit valuable when you're discussing things like, any sort of social issue really, especially in true crime though. The theory that I was thinking about was, you have Lilly Lindestrom found in the bed, and she is found, I believe, face down. They might have even, in one report, they're saying that she actually is still kind of bent over, like she had been sort of on all fours. I believe that that's actually how the body was found. There are so many things on the internet that are saying that all the blood had been drained from her body, most of the blood had been drained from her body, but the issue is, unless somebody is a mortician, they would have had to have been hanging her from the ceiling, suspending her from the air. And the thing that they aren't including is that, were there any sort of screw holes? Was there any sort of apparatus in the ceiling where they could have suspended the body and drained the blood? Not to mention the body was found in the bed on all fours with a condom hanging out of Lily's anus. So it's that is a little bit more suggestive that, kind of the theory that I put forward, that this was a sexual encounter that went wrong, but who did it? Now, my initial suspicion about this was that this was a police officer, and I didn't say it because I didn't really have anything to go on other than my own gut feeling, right? Just a hunch. And then I was watching another video about it on YouTube from the channel Blazar, Blazar, and that guy mentioned on his channel that one of the leading theories is this was done by a police officer. And I was just that's just one of the things when the grid goes off, when you just sort of see that alarm, it's like two people coming to the kind of conclusion without even ever knowing each other. I think that a lot of people could come to that conclusion rather easily, because Lilly was found in bed, dead from blunt force trauma. And the reason why I thought about that was, it doesn't take too much to think about a police baton, a club, or perhaps even the stock of a gun could have been used to inflict the blunt force trauma that caused her death. And they're pretty precise about this, even though we've talked about how, from 1932 and onward, it's very difficult to get precise details about this case, and the internet can spin things out of control. But almost all the sources are kind of in agreement that Lilly died from blunt force trauma, not anything to do with having her blood drained. I personally don't believe that all the blood had been drained from her body. I think that is a total misprint. I don't even believe that most of the blood was drained from her body. What I believe actually happened, based on, watching videos and just reading articles, is that it's most likely that some of her blood was gathered on a ladle, but probably not very much, based on the way that they found the body. And why would this be a police officer? Is it only because, of course, a police officer would have been likely to carry a club or a police baton or some sort of, obviously a firearm, right? I was actually trying to find photos of police officers in Sweden from the 1930s, and that was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be. I just wanted to see like Stockholm police officers in the 1930s and put that into Google, and I really found that it was much more difficult to get kind of just a black and white photo. But I it doesn't really require too much to recognize that police officers do carry instruments like that, where they carry kind of defensive weapons of that nature. But there's another thing about why this could have been a police officer. I was on the channel Crystal's Theories, and it's another YouTuber, and she brought up the point that one of the reasons why people think this could have been a police officer is that they had so much physical evidence. Not only do they have a condom, which in one account says that there was semen still in the condom, they had saliva on Lily's neck and her body. Now, before you say anything about DNA, all right, 1932, DNA is something that we haven't really explored yet. Fingerprints were definitely available in 1932. I mean, fingerprints had been used in crimes, to solve crimes, much earlier than 1932, but they couldn't get any fingerprints or something, and a lot of people interpret that as just the police were covering for one of their own, that this was a police officer who committed this murder, and the police were just covering that up because highly improbable. Another reason why I thought that the instrument that could have killed Lilly Lindestrom was a police baton is that it's not found in the apartment. The perpetrator took it with them. And well, you'd be like, well, anybody could have done that, but if this was just a crime that got heated and got out of control, I mean, I said very clearly in the first part of the series that I believe that Lily was with one of her clients. She was with a man, and she's a sex worker, right? And he demanded anal sex, and she refused, and they probably got into some dispute over that, and then he struck her in the head. But it's like, if that were the case, well, he took the murder weapon with him. Forget the bloodstained gravy ladle. That's not there yet. We're not there yet. He took the murder weapon that caused the blunt force trauma with him. Why would he do that? Like, if it wasn't something premeditated, I mean, is this guy just carrying around some type of club or chair leg in his pocket? And I mentioned it could be the stock of a gun. Yeah, a lot of people carry something like that, but or is this also possibly that it was a police officer who had a baton or some type of club with him and struck her in the head? I mean, that would be a motivation to take the murder weapon with him. And in these crimes of passion that kind of, when the heated moment gets out of control, what often happens is people use an object that is just commonly found in the apartment. Like, they use an object that is commonly just found around. Many murders have happened that way. And it's very possible, though, that this was indeed a police officer. But that channel, Crystal Theories, brought up the interesting point that this doesn't have to be a police officer. It could just be someone who has a connection to the police, someone who had a very close personal connection to the police. And this is also something where I was like, unless this guy specifically went there to murder Lilly Lindestrom, there should have been fingerprints. They're like, either this guy was extremely meticulous, or the police found fingerprints and they just didn't want to investigate because they were protecting one of their own, or a high-profile individual, or somebody who had a close connection to the police department. You imagine maybe the son of the police commissioner or something like that. Not to name names or anything. We're way too early at the point of naming names in the murder of Lilly Lindestrom. Also, there's going to be some discrepancies that we can explore as we investigate this case a little bit more. Like I mentioned in the first upload, there's one source that is saying that the gravy ladle was not actually found in the apartment, like most things on the internet say it was. It was actually found outside in front of the building. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper and try to learn a little more about that, but I was just really reluctant to just sort of start saying that this was a police officer that murdered Lilly Lindestrom, because it was just like, I didn't have anything to share other than my own sort of conjecture, only surmise. But it's like, I noticed that kind of the first two YouTube videos that I looked up on the subject following the last recording said that exact same thing, that One of the leading theories is that Lilly Lindestrom was murdered by an officer. And we mentioned a few reasons about why that could have happened. I would insist, though, it really seems like that this was a case where just a man was demanding anal sex and she refused. I actually talked about the possibility that he could have struck her in the head first and then kind of anally raped her post-mortem, which is very possible. I mean, it's very possible because, like, the condom is found still hanging out of her body. Well, then, what do we make of the blood-stained ladle? I mean, like I said very clearly, I don't believe that all the blood was drained from her body. I don't believe that most of the blood was drained from her body. It's possible that, I'm really just not sure. That's the most honest answer. I think that that's kind of an abnormality. And one of the sources we mentioned in part one was just saying that the journalists who were covering the case, specifically one journalist, got a little bit crazy. And they put a little bit too much fantasy in there. A fantasy-filled journalist ran wild with the story. But it's like, what really would be the explanation to have that blood ladle? I mean, one of the theories is actually that someone was just collecting Lily's blood in the ladle and then pouring it over their food. So what? They murdered Lily after anally raping her and decided to eat a meal? I mean, there's some weird people in the world, but I don't necessarily know if that's true. But I did think about one thing that was rather interesting, that the ladle doesn't seem to belong to Lily's apartment. I noticed that everyone is kind of like they're leaving out that detail in almost all sources. They're saying that it's not just like, oh, they were able to match this to her silverware set. It's the exact same kind that she had in the drawer. It's the exact same kind of things that she had in her kitchen, in her little kitchenette. Well, I mean, if it's not hers, then somebody brought a gravy ladle with them to see a prostitute. That's kind of weird to begin with. Is there something very deliberate going on? And I put forward the biggest theory that I talked about, right? That Lily was murdered by a police officer after demanding anal sex. But another thing that we talked about could be just something like someone was indeed collecting her blood for some sort of experiment or some sort of all other sinister motive where they really wanted human blood. It's a very bizarre thing, that I admit, but there could be some things about this. We're going back to 1932. There could be information about why there is that blood-stained ladle that is not really connected to the case. That could be a pure distraction. That could just, I'm very hesitant to kind of theorize too much about the meanings of the blood-stained ladle, because I don't necessarily think that it's completely relevant to what was happening. And that's what we talked about last time when we were talking about a different case, mind you, but last time it's like, you really want to find that bullseye, the exact thing that would reveal the kind of true agenda of the case. And then some of the exterior details aren't as important. If you can kind of solve the heart and soul of the issue, it's kind of not so relevant about some of these fringe things. Like, if you're to find out that Lilly Lindestrom was indeed murdered by a police officer who struck her in the head with a police baton and then anally raped her, the bloodstained ladle isn't that relevant. And that could be something that is actually just maybe even misreported by journalists. I'm finding a hard time incorporating that into any theory, unless there is some person who just had this type of fetish about drinking human blood or something. But people do weird stuff. I don't know if that's one of them. It's just, and furthermore, that person would have had to have deliberately brought a gravy ladle to see a prostitute. Is it a silversmith or something? I don't really know. That's why it's very difficult to theorize about that, but we can explore this case a little bit further. I don't believe that this is the end of our investigations into the case of Lilly Lindestrom. I just think that it says something, though. When many different people from many different backgrounds are coming to the theory in the same way, it's almost like you're kind of all noticing the same sort of signal. I had never heard anyone on the internet say that it could have possibly been a police officer. I just came to that sort of theory from looking at the information, and then I'm starting to hear these other people say that, and we're all slowly thinking the same thing. Well, what do you think happened to Lilly Lindestrom? I would love to hear any comments at all about this case, and until next time.